Then we start with the global coronavirus outbreak and how it's starting to affect the Middle East. The city of Bethlehem in the West Bank has been put under quarantine. That's after 7 people were diagnosed with the coronavirus. The Israeli Defense Minister ordered the army to enforce that closure in coordination with the Palestinian Authority. So no one, Palestinian or Israeli, is allowed to enter or leave Bethlehem until further notice. With a state of emergency in place, all churches, mosques, schools, hotels in the city have simply been closed. Our Middle East correspondent Anna Foster has this report.
Angry protests on the streets of Jericho. This was where the Palestinian Authority planned to treat its coronavirus patients, but they aren't wanted here. In Bethlehem, there's real concern. The main checkpoint into Israel was closed, and people have been told they can only leave in an emergency.
The infected workers are all from this hotel. They'd been in contact with a group of Greek tourists who tested positive once they returned home. This place is now closed, as are all hotels in Bethlehem. They've been told they can't accept any new tourists for the next 14 days.
That's what we're trying to do.
Antoine is being quarantined inside, along with the 7 people who've tested positive. They're on a separate floor, but without medical treatment, he says. Official information is scarce.
We've done tests, we haven't received any information back, and that's part of our struggle, that we're not getting really much information, whether from the ministries of health or...
Even the world's oldest church has been forced to close its doors. Thousands of people pass through the Church of the Nativity every day to touch the spot where Christians believe Jesus was born. And now, that's a problem.
We have kind of these icons, and every place they have to touch, all the columns there, and even the star where Jesus was born. So that's why it's just really, if someone have this kind of viruses, it just easily will transmit to him.
All public places like this have been shut down to try and contain the spread of the virus.
Sad for closing, not even the church, Bethlehem. They are closing all Bethlehem, you know what I mean? Nothing to do now. And as you know, Bethlehem depends 100% on pilgrim and tourists.
This city relies heavily on visitors from around the world. As a state of emergency is declared, it's now bracing for a double hit to the health of its people and to its fragile economy. Anna Foster, BBC News, Bethlehem.
Plenty of challenges in the US as well, where Vice President Mike Pence, he's the one who's coordinating the American response, has promised measures to help authorities there keep track of the virus. Our correspondent Peter Bowes is in Los Angeles with the very latest on one cruise ship that hasn't been allowed to dock in San Francisco.
Another cruise liner paralysed by the coronavirus. The Grand Princess, with 3,500 passengers and crew on board, has been barred from docking in San Francisco after cutting short a trip from Hawaii. A 71-year-old man died after taking an earlier round-trip cruise on the ship to Mexico. Officials say he had underlying health conditions. Another passenger was also infected. Helicopters operated by the US Coast Guard dropped sampling kits onto the ship for a medical team on board to administer tests for the virus. Less than 100 people with flu-like symptoms have been identified as needing the test. Passengers have been told to stay in their cabins.
Everything was running through my head, and I didn't want to go home. I don't want to go home to my family because I don't want to take anything to them. Right. I don't want to take it to my city if I happen to have it on my clothes or whatever. I don't even know.
A state of emergency has been declared in California. Around the US, there are now cases in at least 20 states. In Maryland, officials said 3 people contracted the disease while traveling overseas. In Washington, the worst affected state, where 11 people have died, tech companies like Amazon, Facebook and Google have told employees to work from home. The US Vice President Mike Pence, who's leading the effort to control the outbreak, visited Washington to meet with state officials.
Our message to families all across the state of Washington is simply this: we're with you. We are here to help, and we're going to stay with you every step of the way until the state of Washington and America sees our way through the coronavirus.
As officials say they expect the number of cases to continue rising, Congress has passed an emergency $8.3 billion spending bill to try to combat the disease. But the financial markets continue to be nervous. On Wall Street, it was another rough day as fears grow of a world economic slowdown linked to the virus. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Well, there are a lot of very personal stories, of course, within the coronavirus situation, and none more difficult, really, than this one. Carrie Colstow is on board that cruise ship, the Grand Princess. It's being denied permission, as we heard from Peter, to dock in San Francisco. Well, she has bone cancer, and she says she needs urgent treatment and is due in hospital on Monday.
The treatment's very urgent. My cancer has progressed shortly before we left home, and the physicians went ahead and patched me up a bit and sent me on this trip so that I could, while they were waiting for insurance approvals. And so it's really imperative that I get there. And really, we're not being told a whole lot, but I don't know whose fault that is because everybody's trying really hard. And then they've told me that I can be put on a list so that if the cruise ship has to stay out to sea for longer, I would be on a list that would be given to the CDC for possible approval to go home. You know, there's 1,100 crew members who are also affected, who are effectively trying to feed and hand bottles of water out. I have bone cancer, it's spread to my bones. I'm trying to get a chair that I can sit on in my stateroom. So just kind of trying for some rudimentary things at this point.
Carrie Colstow talking to us from the cruise ship there. Well, we've had the view from the Middle East and the US. Let's have a look at Asia and Europe. Our correspondent Robin Brandt is in Hong Kong. Bethany Bell is in Italy. And first of all, Robin told me about China and South Korea, both countries showing a drop in the number of confirmed infected cases.
It's clear that officials at the very top of government here and those running state media on the mainland as well are desperate to get to a place where they can say there are no new cases outside of that province of Hubei where this all began. They're getting close to that. I mean, today in the last 24 hours, an increase of 30 in terms of the death toll. That's up to 3,042 now. 29 of those, so all but one, in the province of Hubei. A bit of an uptick as well in the number of confirmed cases of people infected. What they're having to deal with now is an increase in Chinese nationals, mostly some other foreign visitors importing the virus back here into mainland China. So we're seeing much emphasis at airports in Shanghai, Beijing as well, particularly around the capital, Beijing, around people coming from, Japan, Iran, Italy and South Korea in particular.
Yeah, that actually links us very neatly to Bethany for the Italian perspective there, because, I mean, people are now going to have to come to terms with what it really means, Bethany, to shut the schools, to shut the universities, to start taking these pretty dramatic measures to try and contain the virus.
Yes, the schools and the universities remain closed across the whole country. This is, of course, raising big issues in terms of childcare. The government has promised to look at ways of trying to help families deal with that, but it's not quite clear yet what will happen, whether they'll give people money to help with babysitting or whether they will allow one parent at least leave to look after children. And I myself have seen here in Milan grandparents walking around with their grandchildren, looking after them during the day. And there's an irony in that, some of them say, because the government advice, certainly to older people at the moment, is to stay indoors if you can, because the virus, they are more susceptible, more vulnerable to the virus than younger people are. And yet, at the moment, some of them are taking on childcare.
Let's just have a look then at the sense of what the World Health Organization, Robin, in particular would like to see, which is coordinated response, everyone playing their part and cooperating in trying to deal with this. But the realities can be very different. We've got another spat developing between South Korea and Japan, specifically over the way in which Japan is prepared to treat South Koreans?
Yes, I mean, you're right. The World Health Organization, in its daily situation reports, is talking very much about shared logistics, shared expertise, and also shared information. One of the big challenges at the moment is information overload, both on a professional level and for the millions of people across China and across the world trying to decide how to react to dealing with this. But amidst all of this, you've got countries, particularly in this part of the world, trying to cut themselves off from each other. They think to protect themselves physically, but also economically. And South Korea, outside of mainland China, has the most number of infected cases, and that's now on essentially exclusion lists in 100 or so countries. So South Koreans looking to leave their country are now finding that 100 or so other countries are placing restrictions on any visitors. Japan yesterday said it would impose mandatory quarantine of 14 days for visitors from the Chinese mainland and also from South Korea. South Korea doesn't like that. It thinks it's wrong. It thinks it's too much. It thinks Japan might be doing it for other reasons. The Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is struggling domestically there with the way he has reacted to dealing with this whole thing. And those two countries, anyway, have a long established history of animosity going way back to, Japan's occupation of South Korea before the Second World War.
Yeah, good point. Let me see if the EU, perhaps, Bethany, can do better. Let's put it that way. I know health ministers are meeting, aren't they, to try and look at ways in which then they can coordinate a response. I mean, obviously, if you look at the situation in Italy compared to some other European countries, there are significant differences in scale here.
There are. Of course, Italy has seen the worst outbreak in Europe. But yes, those EU health ministers are due to meet in Brussels today. The head of the European Commission has set up what she calls a corona response task. That's looking at medical preparations across the EU. It's sharing information about research into this. And it's also trying to coordinate things like travel advice. Because, of course, the EU's policy of, or the Schengen policy certainly of open borders is something that is a big issue here in the EU. And it's people at the moment, there have been airlines cancelling flights because of lack of demand to countries like Italy. And Italy has kept on saying, its politicians very keen to stress that the outbreak here does represent a very small percentage of Italy's population and that the country is still open for business because there are many big fears about what this could do to Italy's economy.
Bethany Bell there, giving the Italian perspective, also Robin Brandt in Hong Kong. Well, the coronavirus outbreak has also, as we've seen, had a major effect on the global markets. What I want to show you first of all is the situation at point of closure for some of the markets. The Hang Seng and Nikkei, well, they have both fallen, as you can see, significantly, almost 3% for the Nikkei, in fact. And if we just move on to some of the other markets, the Dow there, 3.5% more than as a fall. That is a significant close in New York on Thursday evening. It is the morning here in Europe, of course, and the London Stock Exchange is open, been open for about 15 minutes. And the FTSE 100, well, that opened 1.5% down. I don't want to read too much into this, but it seems to be clawing that back a little bit on early trading, but still the concerns being reflected in the markets.